All right, we're on. Welcome everybody to episode 7, right?
Lucky 7. That's right.
So I can't believe it's this is number 7 already. It doesn't seem like that many.
I was just thinking the same thing, and it's still going.
Yeah.
So, and people are still watching. So I
Yep.
guess that's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm still enjoying it, so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. No, this has been a lot of fun.
yeah.
So, do you remember? Should we announce? I suppose we should announce our schedule change, right?
Yes, and we'll probably do that a few times throughout the stream. So
So,
go ahead.
yeah. So we are changing to Mondays from 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific. So that's an hour earlier than we are now and a day earlier. So for those of you who have been staying up until 2 a.m. in Europe, thank you. And now you can stay up until 1 a.m. So it's a little bit better. And of course, the recordings are going to continue to go up at jamesshore.com/s/nullables-livestream. But yeah, new schedule Mondays, 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific for as long as we keep doing this, which, I think as long as we're both available and having fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, awesome. And another announcement, I have a talk that I'm, a TED Talk, I'm able to say that, coming up next month at the Philly XP. So it's going to be a remote talk for me. And I'll be talking about our favorite topic, or at least my favorite topic, more testable code with hexagonal architecture. And since this will be, since I've got a month before I give this, I'm probably going to incorporate some things I've been thinking about in terms of sort of the general architecture around separation of concerns for testability. So nullables will probably get a mention.
Oh, very cool.
That's in almost exactly a month, or I guess 27 days. At the Philly XP, the link is in chat. So sign up. I'd love to have you. All right. Should we dive into the code? Should I switch to our code?
Let's do it.
Right.
So as I recall last time, what we were doing was we just finished making the JSON HTTP client, which is our low-level HTTP wrapper.
Right.
That is basically provides a clean interface to the underlying Swing Boot thing, which is called REST template, I believe.
Yep.
And what's neat about JSON HTTP client is that it's a nullable. So it gives us the ability to make requests through our HTTP, make HTTP requests that can be turned off. And that's really useful because in our tests, now we can write your adapters, your HTTP score category notifier, your AverageScoreFetcher. We can write the code for those classes, which are actually dealing with your real service, so that they can be tested without having to have an actual instance of the service up and running. Because up until now, you just actually haven't had any tests on those at all because it was too much of a pain in the butt, I presume. Which was my experience too before I started using nullables.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're going to be doing today. Is we're going to be using that JSON HTTP client in your other adapters to make them testable. I don't think it's going to take very long, but I never think anything's going to take very long, and I'm always wrong. But I don't think it's going to take very long.
Right.
And as a result, we'll see where we can go from there. But I think it's going to be interesting to see, because the JSON HTTP client, that's something that you build once, or even as I think the ecosystem matures, somebody else builds for you, and then you just use over and over. So honestly, not that long we spend on it, the 3 or 4 or 5 hours we spend on it, is something that people will spend once or not spend at all. And then the just handful of minutes we spend using it is the real benefit.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing that happen. So we'll have to go fast to prove it's worth it.
Welcome, Suiji, Dota to Attitude, and W. Sanchez. Welcome.
Yeah, good to see you all.
So last time we finished off, we actually put in the HTTP score category notifier. We actually now incorporated the JSON HTTP client, and that did go quickly. And we added the track.
It was literally 10 minutes. At the end of the last stream, because of course I edited it together last week, and so I watched it. I was like, I said, we've got 10 minutes left to do this, and it actually took exactly 10 minutes to get it in.
So should we look for other usages of the regular REST template and replace those? Is that the...
Well, what I was thinking, we could do that. We could go into, I think just the other one would be AverageScoreFetcher. But I was thinking that what we could do is we could put the tests around HTTP score category notifier that have been missing up until now.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, yeah. So if you go into the test for that, there were some comments that we put in at the end of the last episode.
Right.
A real advantage because I'm always editing the video, right? So I know what's up. Yeah, there's the comments we made right here. You had this sort of manual test that you used.
Right.
We want to replace this with a real test. And that should be really straightforward. We should just be able to instantiate the JSON HTTP client and then use the tracker to see that we call it.
So we want to use the post tracker here. So I guess let's enable the test. And I ran all the tests earlier. Let me run them all again. Run all the non-IO tests.
I'm not sure if those are going to run since you've just undisabled that test.
Well, this is going to run and it's going to fail because it's trying to reach the real thing because we did it.
But everything else is passing,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So wanted to make sure it was this. Everything else is working, and this one is actually now failing for the expected reason. So we're going to make this work using the tracker. All right.
So yeah, all we need to do here is we need to make a JSON HTTP client. We need to inject it into the HTTP score category notifier, which means we should probably change the security level of the constructor to be package or something like that.
Okay.
We don't want to use create null in our test because create null is actually part of the public API of this code. And because of encapsulation, we're not going to expose the JSON HTTP client to our callers. But we still need to inject JSON HTTP client. So typically what I'm doing when I'm testing a nullable is I will actually construct the nullable by calling the constructor. But when I'm using the nullable, I'll use the factory methods. I'll use either create in my normal code or create null in my tests. And fairly rarely when I have production code that takes advantage of the nullability.
All right. So here we're going to create a client.
We're going to use the factory on this one. So we're going to call JSON HTTP client.create null.
Force the habit.
Yeah.
And so we're doing create. So eventually we're going to map.
Nope, I don't think so. I think on this one,
okay. This one,
we don't have any responses to configure because there's no response that comes back from the service.
That's right. This is just a notifier. Okay. Yeah. And so here we are going to use the constructor, which will make public as soon as IntelliJ complains, which it is. So we'll go ahead and make it. This test is in the same package, so we'll make it package private. All right.
Yep. And now that test should now pass.
It does. Yep.
And then if we want to see it fail again, if we change that create null to just create, it should go back to failing exactly the way it was before.
Ah, yes. Let's see. So it'll fail because my yacht tracker is not up and running.
Right.
And it's using the real thing. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually something that's kind of cool about this is you'll write the test to say, this is how the code behaves against the null, but you can validate it by just changing over to the real thing, making sure you've got an external service up and running it again and see that the test still behaves the same way.
Right.
So it's very easy to switch back and forth. Not that I normally do, but you do have that power. Yeah. When I originally started doing this, I actually would write two tests. I'd write the first test against the real service, and then all the tests after that against the null. And I'd use that one against the real to say, well, I've really got them all in sync. But then I started doing something called paranoid telemetry, which is saying, let's just check very carefully that the service is behaving the way my code thinks it should at runtime in production. And the reason for that is because you do not run your tests frequently enough to catch the kinds of shenanigans that third parties get up to. So, and once you have that paranoid telemetry in place, having your test run against the real thing is kind of redundant. So, and it's slow and hard and pain to set up. So I just don't do it anymore.
So there's a flavor of sort of test in production kind of thing there, where it's like, it makes no sense to, that stuff you would only detect in production, or production is detecting it more frequently and more often. And so that's the place to put that. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. There's also, I mean, as I'm sure you know, there's this concept of contract testing, right? Yeah. And a contract test is a test. Well, there's people use this in different ways. My preferred approach is where you write tests that say, this is how I'm going to use the service. And then you hand those tests to the maintainers of the service and they run them. That's the way contract tests are supposed to work.
That's the way I learned it.
Yeah. But the way people usually write contract tests or talk about contract tests is they write a test against the service and they run it in their code. And I think there's some benefit to that. There are some things that you can't catch with paranoid telemetry. But I think against an external service, you want to just choose services that are reasonably stable, that do what you say they will. And for internal services that do change more often, I think contract tests in the original sense of the word, where you're actually handing the test to the third party for them to run, or second party, I guess, is a better way of doing it. So anyway, with this test, all we need to do now is make the assertion. So we need to assert that we did the post that does what we said it would do.
So for that, we'll need our tracker. So
I would probably put that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, then this is going to be very much this test. Is there going to be then any?
It's going to be very similar, except that test is talking about the public interface to this code.
Right. But we're still going to do track assignments.
Except it's not. No, that's not going to be right. We're going to do it right after line 14, and we're going to track the HTTP client, not the notifier.
Oh, right. That's the flavor there. So we're going to do JsonHttpClient track requests. Hold on to that. Right, because we're testing at a different sort of layer.
Yeah. This is basically the test saying, do we make the HTTP call? In fact, I think the test should be renamed to be RoleAssignment sends to service or posts a service even. Hey, Java Grunt, thanks for the kind words and welcome.
All right, and so here we're basically going to say assert that the tracker. I'm just going to rename this because that's too long. It's only one tracker. And here we're going to do tracker. And we're going to grab the output. It's going to return a list. And so here we expect that it's going to, should only do one of these requests.
No, not that. It's going to be JsonHttpCrequest.post.
Oh, that's right. We had
hey, your screen is just blanked out for me. I don't know if it's happening on stream or not. It came back.
Yeah. So this is, what do we say, JSON?
It should be JsonHttpResponse.post.
Create post.
Create post. That was it.
Right. And so this then takes the URL template. This is going to be basically this. I guess I'm talking to localhost, so that's what we're going to be talking to. And then this is the object. So this we expect to be the...
Well, it's going to be the role assigned to category domain object, right?
This is going to be at the REST template level, so I think this is going to be at the DTO level.
Right. It'll be the DTO, which I think is the role assigned to category. Yeah. Oh, no, it's a role assignment.
It is a role assignment.
No, that's the output listener. Although...
Yeah, it is the role assigned to category. That's...
Yeah. Although, the role assignment and role assigned to category, that those may be... Perhaps we should be omitting the role assigned to category rather than the... because it's the same thing.
Yeah. Why did we do... just because this assignment... Oh, they are the same thing.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that. We'll come back to that.
Yeah. So this then is a role assignment. That's what we're omitting.
No, this is the role assigned to category. Because that's what
right, because I keep looking because we're... All right. So this is role assigned to category. And this is the role. Oh, that is... so this is... Oh, this is just a string. So 1, 3, 5, 2, 4. I think that's how we serialize it. And then the score is 30. And then the category... I don't think we do anything other than convert enum.
Yeah, Suiji, I think you're right. I think there's a few sort of minor implementation differences between role assigned to category and role assignment. But to me, I think they're the same, representing the same concept. So I'm hoping we can find a way to dedupe it and still sort of fulfill the needs.
We've got a lack of toString on this, so let's go create a toString so we can get better output.
There's no equals on there too, so I think what we've got is just a lack of equality.
Yeah, that's what I was suspecting. That's why I wanted to add our standard things here. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And that's fine. Okay. And fold those. Okay. So actually, yes, we are now on Java 17.
I'm just seeing the Phantom the Star Wars meme with what's her name in it, right?
Oh, we serialized it differently. Okay. Sorry, my machine is locking up a bit here. I don't know why. Okay, so that was the problem, is the serialization was different. So let's see if this fixes it.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, there we go.
I think that's all there is to it.
Yeah. So let's see. So what have we got? We've got, so we're creating the JSON HTTP client nullable, track it. So we're tracking at the HTTP client level versus tracking at sort of this higher level for this one. And then what we expect is sort of what we're posting to and what we're actually posting. Okay.
Right.
Yep. All right.
I don't know that it's better that we're doing new role assigned to category there than role assigned to category.from, which is a sort of more ergonomic interface. I guess the difference is now we don't have to do like handofdice.of and ScoreCategory.littlestraight. We can just have it that way.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, this would then be indirectly testing the DTO from. So if we do change the serialization, then this test would break. And I don't think that's. I think I probably want to put the from here.
Okay.
So we'd say from, and then because I'd want this test to fail, not because we changed serialization.
Yeah, that's my thinking as well.
Yeah, so
it's a little brittle the way it is right now.
Yeah, so let's fix that, and then we get to hand in that, and then, yeah, especially the both serialization. Or yeah, okay, that's better.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
So we got a couple comments in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you want to take Nyan Nyan's?
Yeah. Hey, Nyan Nyan.
First.
Hey, Nanya, you've used to come on the stream, so welcome back. It's been probably quite some time. So asks, why not use given when then formatting comment blocks to make it more readable so someone can see the first client which part of the test does what? So that kind of thing is all. There's sort of this general concept of who are you targeting when you're writing code? And do you target people who are new and have never seen and aren't sort of experienced in reading tests? Do you optimize for that, or do you optimize for someone who's sort of familiar with it? And unless I'm creating sort of tutorials, I'm optimizing for somebody where I assume they know what the different parts of a test are, and that they can pretty readily, once you understand the domain, which of course can be time consuming and takes experience also. And sometimes I'll actually write the comments as sort of pseudo test code as placeholders and things to guide me and remind me what I want to write. But other than that, I generally don't put comments in because that comments actually tend to clutter up the tests instead of actually making them more readable. And so it's one of those, it depends. Most of the time I'm going to target someone who I assume knows how to read it. But sometimes it's useful if you're sketching out a test. Yeah,
I'm with you on that one. I will use white space to sort of separate the different. I prefer arrange, act, assert as my mnemonic as opposed to given, when, then. But whatever. And I will use white space to chunk it up if the test is a little bit bigger. If it's small, I'll just go boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
One thing that we haven't been doing in any of our tests, which has kind of been making me itchy, is that we haven't been doing any setup helper methods. And that's something I will very frequently do. Is now it's less convenient in Java than it is in a language that allows you to return arbitrary objects.
Yes.
Because what I'll actually do is I'll do something like create a notifier, and it will return the notifier and the output tracker. And I will just pull out, which I'll use destructuring in JavaScript, for example, to just pull out the pieces I want from that.
Yeah, it is a little annoying. Like I was editing some of my ensembler videos, and it's exactly that problem where it's like, yeah, I would normally just like, let's extract this out. The problem is we use Java would require either awkward ways to return what we need here, which is we need both the tracker and the notifier. So there are usually two ways I deal with it. Well, three ways. One is I just don't do anything. That's sometimes
you just duplicate your setup.
I just duplicate the setup. This 3 lines is okay when it gets to like 4 lines, or if I'm doing this 3 lines a lot, then I'll figure out another way. So the second way is I'll pull them out into public, basically fields. So the fields get reassigned. I'm a little uncomfortable with that because it's not clear that the fields get reassigned every time. But I'll sometimes do that. Usually the next thing I'll do is go to a test data builder where it'll build it, and then I'll have basically the object that builder will hold on to the things you need, and you can always query what you need. And so that's so there's sort of this big step going from like where we are here, since I can't extract as a single thing. There'll be sort of this then big jump to a more test data builder like thing.
Yeah, there is depending on what you mean by test builder, there may be a middle ground. This is what I put in the article, is just to make it will piss people off because some people get really dogmatic, but I'll just make a class with public fields in it, and I'll call it, for example, create notifier result, and return that, and then you can basically dereference it to get what you care about.
Yeah, I mean I tend not to do that only because I as sort of an educator, I don't like to sort of break rules that people then say, but Ted said you could do this, and it's like, yes, you can, and but the test data builder is very similar in that regard. Like it'll create it, and instead of direct access to a public variable, it's just a query method, and so it's an open close parenthesis, which is really the only difference. So because I don't put getters and get prefixes in front of that stuff.
It's just more code, but it can be generated for you. But even though it can be generated for you, it's just, there's really not a good solution in languages like Java that don't have good optional parameters, don't have destructuring. It's I don't want these return values if we're going to do a builder or a return structure or something like that. They're not relevant. Like they take up space in your brain, but they don't add any real value on their own.
Yep.
So that's why I just do publics, because I'm very willing to break rules when the rules are dumb. And the rule of don't have public variables is something that people have internalized as a rule, and they've forgotten the reason. The reason is encapsulation. What we care about is encapsulation. Right. So people write these silly little classes, DTOs, for example, that have private variables and a bunch of setters and a bunch of getters. And from a design perspective, there is no difference from using public variables because there's no encapsulation. Drives me crazy. And yet they still get upset when I say, oh, well, if you're going to do that, just make it public. Because they don't make the connection with, I've already broken the rule, right? And you've pushed one of my buttons. This is a pet peeve of mine, that people get really dogmatic about this rule of don't have public variables and completely forget the reason behind it. Yeah, drives me batty.
Yeah, well, and for me, it's the other side, which is using getters and setters. And so great, you've done nothing. You haven't encapsulated anything, and now you're using this in the domain, and you've got no. Yeah, so it's one of those. I think you have to choose your battles, and so it's like, what do I want to emphasize and what do I want to not emphasize? So
I've never been smart on that front.
So you just says who's pissing off. I don't think anybody's. I think we've got different buttons around the same stuff. Like if I was not teaching in a certain context and educating in a certain context, I'd be doing certain things differently. Like I would, if I wasn't in the context of Spring, then I'd be doing other things like having more DTO classes with public variables, because it's ridiculous to do anything else. There is also sometimes an auto completion aspect to it. I don't think it applies here, but sometimes that's a rule I'll use. Like, will it affect sort of auto completion for things? And if it harms that, then I'll because especially in Java, that's one of the advantages is you've got all the autocomplete. So,
there was another comment came in from Suiji asking about when I implement higher level nullable infrastructure wrappers, do I find myself re-implementing the tracking and nullable configuration on higher level a lot? I mean, yes, if you're going to do tracking or nullable or configurable responses, which is the name of the pattern in the article, they should be custom built for the class that has the tracking and the configurable responses, and it should be at the semantic level of the class. So, for example, here in HTTP ScoreCategoryNotifier, we don't have any responses, but the tracking is talking about assignments, whereas one level lower, it's talking about HTTP requests. That's very much intentional. That's a feature. Does it bother me? No, because I see the value in having. If you didn't do that, then you'd be talking at the lowest level. You'd be talking about HTTP calls everywhere, and that's not really maintainable or sustainable. But part of the reason it doesn't bother me is because it's not a lot of work, and I think we're going to see that. It was literally 10 minutes for us to put this together, and that part of that 10 minutes was probably re-implementing something we didn't need to re-implement, which was the role assigned to category domain object, or DTO. When we get to doing the fetcher, it's going to be a little more complicated because we're going to have to decompose the nullable down to the next level. And I think that'll be really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing if that's harder in Java than it was in JavaScript. And since everything seems to be just a little bit harder in Java, it probably will be harder, but hopefully not that much harder.
So live coding works in .NET and C#. Yeah, C# is a little bit faster in accumulating features, language features, because I think they're a little bit more like, oh, well, that didn't work. We'll do something else. And so you see, whereas Java is like, let's try this out for a couple of releases, like a year and a half, 2 years, and then we'll pull it in. So destructuring is going to happen, but it's going to be a year or two, and there's other things that will. Especially around records, destructuring records, that'll help some of this kind of boilerplate stuff go away.
The optional parameters is one of my favorite features for test setup, and I think the reason. So of course, Java JUnit, sort of set the pattern for the way unit tests works, and I think the reason JUnit used this sort of kind of screwy before or setup and tear down and instance variables format with lots of magical reflection, which is kind of funny considering who it came from. It came from Kent Beck, who really believes in simple code. I think it came from the fact that you needed to set up multiple variables, and how do you do that cleanly without duplicating yourself everywhere? Well, if you can make a functional call that returns multiple values, it's really, really easy. But Java didn't have that, and it didn't have lambdas. So at the time, so with those two things, I think there's a more modern way of doing testing that's not yet possible in Java, but can be done and definitely can be done in JavaScript, can be done to a degree in C#.
Yeah, and again, that's why sort of the test data builder has become such a common, the sort of the Fluent test data builder has become such a common pattern in Java, at least in my tests, because of that situation where, in addition, there's so that you don't have the optional parameters, so you basically have defaults if you don't explicitly specify it. So it is making up for some of those deficiencies in the language through a different pattern.
Yeah, it's solving the exact same problem, which is we want to be able to say setup. There's some things that we don't care about, so we don't want to specify them. There's some things we do. And the Fluent builder is a great way of doing that. It's just a little bit more verbose. Now you've got to write the Fluent builder instead of just hard coding it. But on the other hand, if you look at some of the examples I have in JavaScript, those defaults, those blocks get really big, right? And it can start to get a little bit unwieldy and hard to read.
Mobadel Huma, boy, it's so hard to pronounce some of the usernames, asks about hexagonal architecture where and how to validate the data of the incoming request. So validation is such an interesting topic. And I'm not going to go into the long answer because I want to keep it focused on nullables. But in hexagonal architecture, I basically look at it as there's validation. There's two kinds of validation. There's this set of bytes came in. Okay, it's a string. Is it supposed to be a number? Okay, it's supposed to be a number. Is it supposed to be a decimal number? Okay, so does it have digits and maybe a dot and whatever what I consider a decimal? And that's all it validates sort of at that edge layer. At some point, you're going to convert it to some kind of value. What does that mean? It's the percentage grade on a test, or it's the temperature of something. At some point, you're going to do a conversion so it has meaningful value in your domain, and that's a domain validation as opposed to a sort of a raw type validation. So the answer is, when I do it in hexagonal, it's in two places. It's in the adapter that first got the thing, and it does as much validation as it can, and then it will basically, when it tries to call the service layer in the domain, it will say, here you go. And then if there's a validation like looked like a number, it was a decimal number, but it was out of range, or it didn't make sense in this context, and it was therefore invalid from a domain standpoint, even though it certainly looked like a number.
I 100% agree with that. I don't think it's unique to hexagonal, actually.
Yeah.
You've got syntactic validation and you've got semantic validation.
Yeah.
One of my very favorite articles is by Ward Cunningham. It's called The Checks Pattern Language of Information Integrity.
Yeah.
It's actually what the Testing Without Mocks article was based on. That's not the content, but the style was based on that checks language. And it's basically saying, well, what do you do with bad data? And it's got this wonderful, wonderful approach that basically uses something that's a lot like the null object pattern to say that we are going to take any type of data and reflect it back to the user so that they can see their mistakes. So at the controller level, mostly what I'm doing is I am doing sort of basic sanity checking. Like, was this a real request from an actual user? And then from there on out, I'm sending, if I'm using the checks pattern language, I'm sending it to my domain layer and I'm reflecting back in that way. So I don't actually reject it. I put it into my domain so that it can be persisted and restored. And so when they request the page again, they still see the data they put in, but it's smart enough at the controller level, it's smart enough to render a invalid value differently than a valid value. And some of the ways to do that are described in the checks pattern language, although it's written for desktop user interfaces, not web user interfaces. So it has to be tweaked a little bit.
Close enough. Yeah. It's really interesting to reread some of those really early, what I think are sort of, to me, it's, and probably to you as well, it's like water. It's like they've always existed in my head, right? It's always been something I sort of take for granted. So,
I mean, the funny thing is stuff like checks still not really part of people's vocabulary, right? This idea that what we're going to do is we're going to take something in. Let's say we're going to store it in the terms of the domain concept. We get a number in, but we don't have a number. We have a die roll, and the user typed in, if you're allowing them to have arbitrary input, which you're not, but the user typed in XXX. That's not a valid die roll, but we still store it as a die roll object. When I implemented this pattern, I stored it as an invalid die roll. I had a valid die roll, or actually it was currency. I was doing a spreadsheet type thing. So I had valid dollars and I had invalid dollars. And valid dollars rendered themselves as dollar blah, blah, blah. And invalid dollars rendered themselves as the original string with a little exclamation mark icon and a hover tooltip saying why it was invalid. And the neat thing about that is I could program it so that a dollar amount plus dollar amount gave me a dollar amount. And the invalid dollar amount would give me another invalid plus anything would give me another invalid dollar amount. And so you typed in something bad and the whole spreadsheet would just go and it would fill up with invalid dollar amounts. You could hover with them and see what went wrong. Was the number too large, or was it not a string, or whatever?
Yeah, and that kind of thing, like Momodal mentions the bean validation API, and it's such a weak thing. I almost never use it because it uses annotations and it's very, and the messaging isn't exactly what you want, and it to me is just the wrong sort of abstraction. So much representing invalid things as saying this is still something we want to represent as a type of some sort is much more powerful. And thinking about, like, we often, and I know we're getting a little off on a tangent, but
as is tradition.
So this blackjack game, which is what I use in my courses, there's this idea of a hand, right? The hand you have, and basically, did you beat the dealer or not? But there's really different kinds of hands. There's the initial hand, and then there's a hand that's been busted, where it makes no sense to ask certain questions like, did this hand beat this other hand? It's like, that's an invalid question because that hand is busted. It's already lost. So a hand that's lost, you just can't ask it other questions. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about sort of, and to me, it always comes back to, like, there's inherent state machines in all of these different kinds of objects that are not, we don't represent as top level types all the time.
If you I see that Java Grunt likes the invalid versus valid. If you're interested in seeing what that looks like implementation wise, do a Google search for my very first live stream. Is called Let's Play TDD. It was done in Java with Swing, and you'll see a couple hundred episodes that are about 15 minutes long, and source code, and you can sort of go check that out and see how that's implemented.
Yeah, I'll probably put that into a separate stream, because I talk a lot about primitive obsession and how we don't even do the minimum stuff of, like, this is not a string, this is an email, this is a zip code. Right. It's like one thing is just validation, but also it's stop validating all over the place, and but almost more so the meaning that it brings to, oh, this is a weight. Oh, there must be, not just a numeric component, but some, like, what unit is it? And those kinds of things just make code reading so much easier.
And also just so much less error prone, because you can't pass in an email to a body, right? Your type checker will catch that, whether it's a runtime type checker like I do in JavaScript, or a compile time type checker like you do in Java. Either way,
you can't mix them up.
It will fail at that point.
Yeah,
that's actually one of my gripes with TypeScript, is that they don't enforce their types if they're the same underlying. Like, you can do type
the nominal versus structural type. I learned what that meant because I'm like, why is this wrong?
Yeah. I want to like TypeScript, but so far I'm just waiting for JavaScript to get proper type erasure as part of the language, because anyway, that's a whole nother thing. I've been doing runtime type checking in JavaScript for years and years and years and years, and it's basically getting me everything I need. And every so often I'm worried, like, well, this must be hurting my performance, so I delete it out, and it does nothing to my performance.
I'm sure,
yeah. It's one of those things. We've talked about this before, how people's intuition about what's expensive is always wrong, or nearly always wrong in programming. So anyway,
should we talk about null? No, we're not talking about null. Let's not talk about null.
Yeah, let's not talk about null. Let's talk about nullables.
Yes.
So I think we're done with JSON or I think we're done with HTTP score category notifier. We should check this in.
Yep.
But then I want to ask, should we combine role assigned to category and role assignment? We test that HTTP score category notifier posts to service, or add test for it posting the service.
Okay. So let's see, we've got role assigned to category. This could now be a record because we're now in Java 17 land.
Yay! Hallelujah.
So that would get rid of a bunch of boilerplate. And then
will it still work since it's using the Spring Boot magic and
Yeah, it should, because reflection should just work. We could always try it and run our tests.
Yeah, let's try it.
So convert.
I got to tell you, apropos of absolutely nothing, I'm looking outside my window here, and there is just an absolute freaking unit of a squirrel running around on the tree outside my window. This thing is as large as a small cat. It is enormous.
Oh, wow. That's interesting that it didn't... It deleted the hash code, but didn't delete the equals and toString. Well, I guess it wasn't sure if I had overloaded that. Okay, so that is now...
Nice. Okay.
Wait, why does it think it's never this? I'm gonna ignore IntelliJ here, because like it's literally it's hilarious, because it says like you've got 5 usages, but wait, you're not using it. And I'm like, yeah, somebody's wrong, but that worked fine.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So,
but we were looking to see if we wanted to get rid of one.
Yeah. So I think role assigned to category and role assignment are in the same conceptual space. They're both representing a role. You've got role assigned to category as a DTO that's sort of private to HTTP score category notifier in a sense.
Yeah, because it's what it decides how it's going to convert basically the domain information to a string, how it's going to serialize it.
Right. Where's that? How is that serialization being used? Because I see you're making a role string, but I don't see where that role string is going.
Let's see. That is basically what's being posted.
Okay, the role, the score, the category. Right.
Yeah, so it's basically at what semantic level do we want the listener to know about? Do we want the basically in the tracker, do we want to track against the domain types, or just literally what is going to be sent via the post?
We want it to be at the domain level, because what it's sent by post is really an implementation detail. So we could argue, but role assignment, I think what we've done here, and I think we should probably set it aside for when we do more of an architectural discussion, but I think we've discovered a missing domain concept in that you have a data clump called hand of dice, score, and score category that you're passing into role assigned. And what you should be passing in is a domain concept like role assignment,
right?
Or not role assignment, but just
assigned role.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, assigned role. Yeah. And that's what we should be emitting, and that's what we should be tracking. That's what we should be taking. And then there's this sort of philosophical question of, well, if we have value types like assigned role, do we program those value types to be serializable to our underlying data representation, or do we add boilerplate and extra cruft to as a translation layer? There's not really a right answer.
How do you really feel about that, cruft?
Well, I think I hate cruft, but at the same time, having a translation layer protects us against changes in the future.
Yeah.
So, or it allows us to potentially persist to more than one place.
Yeah.
So, although that may have sounded kind of judgy,
it did sound judgy.
It's just because I'm a judgy person. Yeah. I think there's a case to be made on both sides there. Yeah. And
but I think you're right that this data clump, this missing domain concept of assigned role is sort of the source of the oddness of why does this exist here only?
Yeah.
And only for this purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. And Sweegie makes a really good point that what you're doing with your role assigned to category is an anti-corruption layer where we're basically acting as a bulwark.
Right.
And I used to use anti-corruption layers a lot in my code. But they end up creating this huge amount of boilerplate. And so these days I tend towards not using anti-corruption layers except when I realize that now it's going to be really expensive to change. But if we had a value type that, for example, did the serialization, if we decided to change that serialization, it wouldn't be expensive. It would only be expensive if we wanted to serialize to two different locations.
Right.
And we could do that by simply intercepting the value type in HTTP score category notifier and putting in the anti-corruption layer at that point.
Yeah.
So the way I'm thinking about it, whenever I'm making a design decision, the main thing I'm thinking about is how simple can I make this without making it difficult to change in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And for every decision, how hard is this going to be changed in the future?
Yeah.
And if it's not hard, boilerplate is out the window for me. It's like simple, straightforward. And you've probably sort of gotten some of that when we've talked about hexagonal architecture. I'm like, well, why do we have a port?
Right.
If you want to change it later, change it later.
Right.
But I understand that not everybody agrees with that, and there are some downsides in terms of less consistency.
Yeah.
If you've got sort of really hard and fast rules, you're going to have a lot of consistency in the way things show up in your code.
Yeah, and that consistency has been sort of top of mind for me as I've been slowly working on sort of this separation architectures in general, separation of concerns architectures in general, that some lean towards less consistency, and sort of less cruft, less extraneous things, because you're relying on judgment. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have an even spread of judgment, that might not come out well.
And Suije makes that point really well in the chat. He says, whether I'd use it, or he or she, depends a lot on the team that they're on.
I literally just wrote that today. It's like that's going to depend on whether you can the structure and culture of your organization and the experience level and design experience level of your team, and the volatility of that team as well.
Yeah, in terms of turnover. And as much as I would like to say, well, let's just hire people who we can trust, the larger you get, the more structures you have in place. Yeah. Like if you've got one person, you can trust that one person, or not, but you know that one person. Yeah. If you have a team, now you need structures in place. If you're using pair programming and collective code ownership, then actually I can trust that team. Mm-hmm. But if I'm doing individual ownership where everybody's doing their own thing, now we need all this stuff to make sure that they're on the same page. Yeah. Then you go up a level from there. If we have 5 teams, how do we keep that in sync? Right. Well, you need new structures. You need stuff like fast, fluid scaling technology. Right. Well, what if we've got 500 people? Like it just... Yeah. But at the same time, when you look at the really big name, I was going to say high performance. I don't know if that's true, having worked with some of these companies. But if you look at the really big name companies like Google and Microsoft,
they're not high performance
and so forth.
I've worked with them. They're not high performance.
I wasn't going to go there.
Well, it's one of those you can't generalize. You'd have to look at individual teams, but across the board,
Yeah. Well, what you get at those really big companies is people who have really high opinions of themselves because they're at a big company.
Right.
But what you see at those really big companies is a fair amount of autonomy. Yeah. So,
and it's definitely a struggle. Is and like you're saying, it's like the autonomy. Then if you allow too much autonomy, that's bad because then nobody can work together. And if you don't, or you can't switch teams, or there's a lot of all sorts of things. And then if you try to then you try to standardize, then you've got other issues, and so
I mean, this is why this is why I'm a software engineering consultant, because these sorts of questions about how do we create great results given the need to coordinate a huge number of people and a large variety of skill levels and experiences, that's really interesting to me. And I understand that for a lot of people, it's like death. It's not interesting at all. No. But to me, like that's the fundamental fun question. Like I've been programming long enough that programming is not such a challenge anymore, but that this people stuff is still always a challenge and an interesting one.
Yeah.
All right. So I said this was going to be fast, and here we are an hour in, and we've done like 10 lines of code. So
that's pretty good.
About on par. Should we take our first hourly break?
I was going to suggest let's do that, and then when we come back, we'll get going.
Yeah, and I think when we come back, let's tackle. Let's hold off on the deduping of role assigned to category and role assignment,
Yep.
and let's tackle the score. Whatchamacallit fetcher.
Yep. All right. All right, we're back.
All right. So yeah, let's do some coding. So I think we're done with HTTP score category notifier.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into our fetcher. I don't remember the name of it.
Let me just do a commit that we converted.
All right.
Records. So I did that for both of them.
I'm sorry?
I converted both of those value-like objects to records. And we can close this. And we want AverageScoreFetcher.
Right. Yeah, so this one's going to be a little more interesting, I think, than the notifier, because the notifier didn't have any configurable responses, but the fetcher will. So what we're going to be doing in the notifier, when we made the tracker, we just started tracking. We just did a new tracker for the thing that it cared about.
Mm-hmm.
But for the fetcher, what we're going to do is we're going to decompose its responses down one level, so we don't have to build a new stub. We'll see what that looks like in a moment. I think the first step, though, here, well, let's just for the people who haven't seen this for a while, why don't you make that window a little bit bigger and let's just walk them through what we've got here.
Actually, let me do this.
And do you want me to do that walkthrough, or do you want to do it?
You can walk through it.
Sorry?
You can walk through it.
Okay. So yeah, what we have here is AverageScoreFetcher is basically a client for your service, which has got this average scores in it. It's the get from the service analog to the HTTP score category notifier that we were just working on. And it's talking to the same service in the same database. So create and create null is making the normal and nulled versions of it. Average for is actually doing the retrieve using the REST template response, the Spring Boot stuff. And then the whole rest of it is an embedded stub. It's basically stubbing out the REST template, and it's also doing all the configurable responses like we see right here. But ultimately, what I think that boils down to is that either we can return a single value or we can return multiple values. I don't know if we actually even did multiple values for this one, did we?
We did. Well, the value for a single score category was programmable. We had a map where we'd make sure to return the right score for the configured
right. But not
category.
Multiple scores.
But not multiple scores. No.
And the reason for that is because just, again, this is programmed at the semantic level. Yeah. Conceptually, you don't have multiple averages. There is just one average. You call it over and over, you should get the same response back,
right,
unless something has happened to change it.
Right.
In which case, I don't think we're going to be testing that. But if we do, we can support that then.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of stub stuff in here that's all going to go away. We want to change this over to use to be implemented with the JSON HTTP client.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is going to be a little bit trickier in that we want to make that change without blowing up the configurable responses. And I'm trying to think about how to do that in small steps. Because not only do we have it tested here, but it's actually being relied on in the rest of the code.
Mm.
You know what I think we can do? Is, if it was me, I'd probably just YOLO it, to be honest, because I don't think it's going to be that much code. but I know you don't like that. So, and you like taking small steps, which is good. It's unlike the public variables where I think sometimes people miss the point. Taking small steps is genuinely a good idea.
Good.
It's just that we've got to switch this all over from being a real REST template and a stubbed REST template to being a null and not nulled version of the JSON HTTP client. What we could do is we could modify create so that we could basically have a flag. We could say, if we're nulled, do one thing. If we're not nulled, do the other. And that way we'd be able to sort of take it one piece at a time and introduce the...
I'm all for scaffolding as a way to create smaller steps. And then we take it away.
Yeah. So Luigi says, do a commit before you YOLO it.
I did a commit.
I think we did a commit.
I just did a commit. Yep. Because we converted those two things to records. That's our commit.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I'm inclined to YOLO it is because
I'm also fine YOLOing it. I mean, that's, you know,
I don't think it's going to be that hard. I mean, there's definitely there's different, just not much to do here. Suiji also says do a parallel change. That's often what I'll do is I'll just like duplicate.
That's my go-to. Yeah,
and work that way. But I don't know that it's going to be necessary. Let me drive for a second and let me do some pseudocode.
Yep.
So if we are in the HTTP score category notifier, okay, hold on one second. I'm having some trouble with. Okay, I can't type anything into my IDE.
Oh no!
So been having some trouble with code together today. While we were on break, we tried to fix it and it didn't work. So yeah, I don't know what's up with that. Yeah, so I can't type anything here. Force quit. I can't even force quit it. Anyway, what I was going to say is what we're going to do here is we're going to make a new JSON. We're going to make a JSON HTTP client.create null, and we're just going to have to map the score category and double to the HTTP endpoints.
Okay.
Let's do a parallel change. I think that's probably the simplest way to go here.
All right.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to try to reconnect code together once again.
Oh no, Whiskey Sierra, welcome. Sorry you missed the first hour. Make sure, so this is also a good opportunity for those who weren't tuned in earlier. Schedule change, we're moving to the, from Tuesdays to Mondays. So next Monday will be our next stream, and a 1 hour earlier start. So Whiskey Sierra, if you're off by 1 hour again, you'll be off by 2 hours. So, same stream channel, but 1 hour earlier on Mondays.
Yeah, I'll update the calendar invite. So there's a calendar invite. If you go to jamesshore.com/s/nullables-livestream, there's a calendar invite there that you can download. I will update that after today's stream. As soon as it shows the proper time and date for the next session, you can download that new calendar invite if you want it.
Yeah, we're thinking of all you folks in Europe, but you don't have to stay up so late.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like I've got Go Together working. Fingers crossed.
All right.
But in the meantime, yeah, I think just given how much trouble we had with mapping, I would YOLO this in JavaScript because mapping is super simple and straightforward. But given how much trouble we had doing the mapping last session, maybe we should duplicate this and sort of slowly go through it.
So my parallel changing the create null to take some map?
I think we'll just, the way I would do it is I would comment out all the tests and then just go through them one at a time and re-implement each one.
All right.
So yeah, let's start with let's start it with we don't have a proper test of the implementation. Let's start out by doing that. Let's show what it would be like if we were coding this from scratch using the nullable JSON HTTP client wrapper. So let's make a test that says that it retrieves data from external service.
So I'm just going to say fetches. And so we would say AverageScoreFetcher. So first we'd say JSON HTTP client, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we would we're going to do this one that takes the responses. Right. And so that's going to be a map of some URL to, we would like it if so we're gonna something like score category, let's say 5s, that we'd like to return. What does it return?
It's going to return a score. What does it return?
I think it just returns a number.
Just returns a number. Yeah. That's what the AverageScoreFetcher returns. But what is it's going to be a category average.
Right. Should this be a string?
Well, it's going to be literally a category average instance. Because we're specifying what is the HTTP client return, and that's going to return the DTO.
Oh, right. It returns a DTO. And that's one of those, and that is the category, which is 5s, and the average, which we'll say is 25. Right. So we'll get my head wrapped around about what level the HTTP client, JSON HTTP client is working at.
Yeah.
So it works at the DTO level. Okay. And let's actually hold on to that client.
And that throws me a little bit too, because I really want it to be operating at like method headers and body type of level.
So I mean, one of the things, and I don't know if we ever want to do this, but there is a way to tell REST template use this true actual, like by default it uses, I don't know if it uses the Java one that's built in or the Apache one, but you can substitute another one. I think that would be actually fairly painful to do, but it would be one of those things that if you really wanted to sort of track that stuff at a lower level, you could do it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, from a documentation perspective, it's really nice to be able to say, this is the blob I get back from the service, and this is how it turns into a thing, right? But
yeah, I mean, I wonder if maybe the name is wrong.
The JSON HTTP.
Yeah, that maybe it should be JSON REST template, because it is. I know it, but that's where sort of, at least for me, where the disconnect is happening.
Yeah.
We can leave it. It was just something to take a note of.
Yeah, Brave Cobra, the reason we're doing it this way is because we're using the underlying thing that we're wrapping is REST template out of Swing Boot. So we don't ever have access to the actual HTTP exchange. But for me, I don't see that as a benefit that Spring Boot is providing us. I think that automatically doing the translation from the string into an entity, that is good. But ultimately, from a documentation perspective and just a being in control perspective, I really want to say, look, this is the actual exchange. This is the actual thing I'm sending out. This is the actual thing I'm getting back. Because when we're designing the service, that's the level we're thinking at. That there is no service that operates at Spring Boot level. They all operate at the level of method, headers, and body.
Yeah, I mean it's basically Spring MVC trying to through its magic letting you ignore those details, whether that abstraction is useful or good or not. It is somewhat irrelevant in the sense that if you're bought into Spring Boot or the Spring framework, you're using it, and so it is what it is.
If I were to design it, I would have a low level thing that returned the actual body, and then because you do want that automagic parsing, that's valuable, and nobody wants to do that more than once. I would just have it be a library, JSON to entity.
Well, it actually uses a library called basically object mapper. So that's what it's using to do the translation for you. Is basically it throws it at a library, which is the JSON object mapper.
Yeah. But as you
Jackson,
said, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Like, this is what we're stuck with. But the clunkiness that generates is showing, I think, as we're trying to reason about this. So we've got our JSON client. We have it configured to return an entity. Now we need to make the average score fetcher.
So here we want to new it up.
Yeah, we're going to new it. And we'll need to change the permissions on that.
And now we will need to create this constructor. Let's create the constructor. It doesn't like that this, so I'm going to take the final off of that so it doesn't complain. All right, so we've got our average score fetcher, and we want to say that
there's going to be two parts to this. One, we're going to assert on the response, and two, we want to assert that it actually makes the correct call. And I actually would start out by saying that it makes the correct call.
So given that when we do the average score, so we also need the tracker. That's what I forgot. So let me put that in. Oops.
And sometimes I actually split this into two tests. One that says that we're calling the correct endpoint, and the other one saying that we do the translation correctly.
Tracker. So when we do average score fetcher, average score lives, start that tracker, put contains exactly.
Last time you used contains only.
Probably should have used contains exactly.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
I don't think I was thinking when I wrote it.
Because contains only is independent of order, right?
Well, it's not only independent of order, only means that the thing you're checking for, there could be two of them, but they're the same thing.
Right. So it's a set.
So yeah. So the exactly is like the most constrained check you can do.
Yeah. It's not great names because it's very hard to tell what the difference is.
And this is why I wrote this document that basically is a 5-page document on all the different variants that you might use. Only is useful, but I agree, like the naming is it's hard. Those names are hard. So we expect that this is going to have what did we do?
It's gonna have a get, so a JSON HTTP request .get, create get.
And this is just the URL template, which is
just the interpolated URL. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking like this is our naming for the parameters is perhaps a bit.
Yeah. Let's go fix
Not
that
right.
because that's
Yeah.
wrong. That should be just URL.
Oh, sorry, my cursor went away. There it goes.
So my favorite thing to do when I encounter something like this is I will stash off the current work in Git. I'll make the change, I'll check it in, commit it, and then I'll unstash. That way my commit history is still clean. But if you don't care about that,
I don't care about that. I'm not
then
that concerned.
do the post, create post as well.
Okay. So create the get. Do it this way. Oh, that was actually
We're
worse.
missing a parenthesis somewhere, I think.
Nope, we're good.
Okay. I didn't see it there at the end of that line.
Yeah. So we set up, we call average for, our expectation is when we call average for given a score category of 5s, it is going to make this request.
Right.
If it uses the client.
That's going to fail because AverageScoreFetcher is null.
Yeah,
because
so the rest template is null because we basically had an empty, not here.
I thought we weren't even returning.
Well, that's a constructor, so we got
I thought it was a factory method.
It was a do nothing constructor.
Yeah.
So
we want that to store that off.
Yep.
Okay, that's still going to fail because we're not using it yet.
Yeah, the failures.
So we'll get an empty list back from our output tracker.
No, because it's still trying to execute against the REST template when we're doing the actual fetching.
Oh, right. So at this point, this is where I would sort of get into parallel construction mode, where I would just run the tests against AverageScoreFetcher and not the rest of my tests until I got this working again. Because we're going to break it. We could continue to use the REST wrap, the REST template, but I would probably just comment out the existing code and call the JSON.
Well, we commented out the rest of the test, so that should be fine.
Yeah,
So,
but I meant the rest of the test and the entire code.
Oh, yeah. We can run just this. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, we should be able to, actually, we don't even need to comment this out. We can just change REST template.get for entity to JSON HTTPClient get. I think the rest of it is almost all the same.
And so
in line 42, we should comment. We should have return null or something for now.
we can actually return category average. Average. All right, so null pointer. It will.
I think that will work.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next thing we need to do is test the line that you sort of prematurely implemented.
Oh,
we need to test that we're returning the average. What'd you say?
I took too big a step. Yeah.
Yeah. Not that big of a deal. And if we had good setup, then I would probably say do this as a separate test, but I think it's simple enough to just make an assertion on the return of line 24 on the left.
So let's hold on to that. Average. Do you have an implicit order or explicit order that you do when you do this test? Do you test like the tracker first and then the higher level thing, or do you test like average first, or do you not care?
I actually usually do it as two tests.
Oh, okay.
And so the first test, I actually won't set up again, we're sort of running into the limitations of Spring Boot here. So I'll have the first test just create the null HTTP client without any return values programmed in. We can't do that because that would throw an exception in this case. And then I run it and I assert that we are making the appropriate call. And then I have a second test which has the return value set up, and I write the test saying that it's doing the parsing and stuff appropriately. And then I'll have a whole bunch more tests that say, well, what happens when we get bad JSON back? What happens when we get this? What happens when we get that? And all sort of the edge cases. What happens if it gives us all the right JSON, but it's not a number, right? What if it gives us a bad status, and so forth.
So here we're expecting 25.0. This will now fail because I forced it to return 0 because I wanted to see it fail.
Yeah, and the reason to do this in small steps, Brave Cobra, is not because I'm worried about doing it wrong, but more because I want to make sure that we actually wrote the right assertion.
Yeah,
I want to see it fail.
Yeah.
Just like Ted said.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I actually undid the premature code, because if I had left it this way, then we wouldn't have seen the test fail. And like James, I'm very much on the I want to see this fail, because if it doesn't fail, then will it ever fail? Is it detecting the right thing? So
yeah,
that's one of the things I'm pretty pedantic about. All right, so that passes.
Yep, and I think that's good enough. So now we want to do the null fetcher returns the default value.
Okay. And so we're not going to do that.
So I think we're going to still need the same. Oh no, we won't need the null. What did you just take out?
Oh, I just took out the create null.
Yeah, so we still want that, I think.
Oh, but we want it to go through the.
We want the implementation to go through the JSON HTTP client.
Right. So
if we run this, it should fail. It should fail with a null pointer exception on this line 40.
Right.
Because that JSON HTTP client isn't being set up.
Yep. Right.
Yeah. So now on the right, at the first create null, we can return actually, before you do this, I'm worried that we're going to forget it and we don't have any tests around it. So line 23, change that to JSON HTTP client dot create. That is the one line of code that's not going to be tested at any point except by smoke tests if you have them.
Right. All right. And then so here we want to create the null. But without any parameters.
Yeah. And what we need to do is we need to basically, I don't know how you want to implement this, but we need to basically put in every score category endpoint with a default value.
That's a good question, because it's expecting a map.
I mean, the brute force way, we might want to start with this, would be to just put in every endpoint or every score category. But of course, the proper way to do it would be to loop through the enums and put them in.
Let's loop through the enums. It's not that big of a deal. So let's do score category. Score category values. And do 4.
Yes, Luigi, the fetcher doesn't need tracking, I don't think, because we can we always have a response back that we can look at.
This is what we want to pass in. String object. We'll do string, and the object is going to be
it's going to be the same thing as before, which is
category average.
Category average, yeah. The default value of 42.
And the string category, which is the same. And that. All right. URL not configured. Oh, silly me. I didn't actually put in the URL. It's the endpoint, not just the rest of the stuff.
But there's our nice error message.
Yeah.
You know, good thing that was good on us for doing it properly.
There we go.
Yeah. So this is the decomposing I was talking about, and even though it's a little bit tedious, it's not that bad, generally speaking, and it's what allows you to have this magical effect that if we do something down in JsonHttpClient that causes the code to break, then all of our tests that depend on that broken behavior will now fail.
Right.
As opposed to using a mock or another test double, they don't fail. And that has saved my bacon. Because that does happen. I'm sure everybody's had that experience where the tests aren't failing, but the code isn't working. You're like, why isn't this failing?
Why isn't this working?
Because it's not actually running that code.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the dreaded, I'm going to have to drop into the debugger because I don't see what's going on.
Yeah.
All right, so that test pass.
So let's do the next one.
Yeah.
So the next one is now basically the same thing, except that we need to merge in the
right. So this map needs to sort of convert into this kind of map.
Yeah. Let's start out by just cutting and pasting that code, and then we'll factor out the commonalities second.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brave Cover, that is the fundamental trade-off here between the testing without mocks patterns and testing with stubs and spies and mocks, is that if you use the testing without mocks patterns, you get full coverage with associable tests, but now you have to have an embedded stub in your production code. I think the security risk that people worry about is overblown. People always say, well, what happens if an attacker runs that code? And the answer is the same thing that happens when the attacker can run any arbitrary code they want. And also, since fundamentally what the stub does is turn off behavior rather than enable behavior, it's not really a problem. But some people don't like that. And if you don't like it, then these patterns are not for you.
All right. So entry dot Get key.
I feel it fall. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Oh, I fail at fail, I think is what the name is. The hard-coded URL is the actual URL of the endpoint. I think we've got a constant for it somewhere. And we should probably factor that out, that constant out.
The URL constant or something else? Sorry, I only caught half that.
I'm just making a note. I'll get back to you. I'll let you finish doing this. I was looking at chat. Are you still working on?
Yeah, I'm just getting switching the for loop from iterating through all of them through iterating through the map is always a little. I'm sure I could have done it with a map. Let's see, what get value. Okay, and I think that's right. And then
so yeah, fail. This is sort of a toy project, and it's hard coded to use localhost. It's that is just part of the way it works. But there is a constant that has that value in it.
Yeah. So this would normally come in. I just hadn't pushed it that far. This would normally come in as a configuration. It would actually be passed in as configuration information through to directly to this to the ScoreFetcher saying here's the, and it would come in as this URL template. I just hadn't pushed it out to configuration. Yeah. Okay. I think I got this right.
Is the test passing?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. It's like, we'll see. Yes. Yeah, look at that. I got it right.
Yay.
I'm as surprised as anybody. I don't know if the map for each is... the map for each is better because it deconstructs the entry more nicely. So let me switch that. No, that's just a iterator for loop. Map for each. I think that's the same thing. We'll do that. Yeah. Yeah, that's much nicer. Okay.
So I kind of want to say that we're missing a test here, which says that first that should be nulled fetcher, not null fetcher. But we're missing a test that says that it still gives us the default on the ones that aren't configured.
Okay.
Do we want it to work that way?
I was going to say,
actually, no. I think
is that what we want?
Yeah. I think if it's not configured, it's not configured.
Because I'm trying to think of if I had an expectation and I've already configured stuff. Yeah, I actually
don't expect anything else to be. Yeah. So let's go ahead and uncomment the next test.
And yeah, so if it's not configured, so it configures for 4s, it is not configured for full house. We do expect something like, we would like something like that. And of course, we get the JSON HTTP client version of that.
Right. And that, I think how much do we care about making that pretty? What are your thoughts?
I think it has all the, I think it would be pretty obvious if something went wrong, what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somehow I thought, which is, I wanted it to, not have full house, then this tells me, I think it depends because it tells us which one it was looking for because that's part of the URL.
Mm-hmm.
If it weren't, if somehow it were although it is a GET request, so what else would it be? I would say it's good enough for now, because I don't know what I need, but I don't know what else I need, I guess is the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking at how I've done this in some of my code. I think a nice error message is nice, but I don't think it's really necessary. Whiskey, I think, hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Like it really comes down to how hard is this to understand.
Yeah.
But also kind of how much of a pain in the butt it is to implement.
Right.
And I don't know that implementing a proper error message on this is actually that beneficial to us.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was saying. It's like I don't know for right now, I don't know what I'd want that would be better. I mean, I can sort of guess, but without having to sort of a realistic scenario, I don't know how to make it better. Is sort of the way I'm looking at it. So I think that this is, yeah, we could implement something, but if it feels a bit yaggy.
Yeah, I agree. So let's go ahead and just change the message there.
Yep. Oh man.
It does bother me a little bit because that's not the right semantic level. But I think it's good enough.
I mean, if we want to do it sort of for more demonstration, educational purposes, we could do that, but I'm not sure what that would take.
Well, let's see what we got. Okay. So the main thing I want to do is I want to fix the duplication and sort of ugliness of our create nulls.
They're pretty ugly.
And I think, often I will do this. I will say, when it comes to error cases, I will start implementing it, and then I will let the error case be whatever's simplest to implement. So as we do this, we may discover that having a default to 42 is nice, simple behavior, in which case I don't think that would be a bad outcome. Generally speaking, I do want my nulls to have meaningful sort of defaults rather than just airing out.
Yeah.
There's a bit of the one exception is when I'm configuring a list of responses, then when I run out of that list, I want it to fail. But if I'm asking for something that's not configured at all, then I typically want it to return with a default value. So we might end up changing line 62 to say, the test to say, when configured, null fetcher returns default values for unconfigured categories, or something like that. That's probably the cleanest way of dealing with this.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, like, I mean, again, this is a little, this is a toy app, so I'm trying to figure out why I wouldn't configure if I'm configuring something. I don't know that I always want defaults for everything I didn't configure. I guess I'm not sure.
My experience has been that in your tests, when you're doing sociable tests, because you're running more code than your tests are testing directly, they tend to end up running code that you don't want to spend the time to configure. And that's why I say create null needs to always have a meaningful default. Now, I don't know that that's true in this case where we're configuring part of it and not configuring the other part, but I would still be inclined to have a meaningful default. And I do tend to choose a default that's
obvious.
I never use in my test. Like I always use 42 as my sort of unconfigured value. And I'll say nulled blah 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 for unconfigured values for everything else.
Yeah, no, I can see that in other. I mean, this one we're testing pretty directly,
but we are going to be using this.
But we're going to be using this at higher. Yeah. So I can see that. Yeah.
So eventually, in our controller, we're going to be making. So this is where it comes in. It's not when we're testing it here, but in our controller. So this is going to be used by our game service. Our game service is going to be used by our controller. Our controller is going to say create a null game service. At that point, we're going to want to be able to say things like, configure the game service in this way, but we're not going to want to configure every little thing.
Right.
But in that game service, it might go out and fetch all the averages.
Which, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And we don't want to throw an exception when it does that.
Right.
So that's why we want it to default to not throwing an exception.
Right.
And the one exception to that, so to speak, is when you're returning a list of values. So you're always saying it's configured and I expect exactly these things to come back.
Right.
So yeah, let's change this. I'm going to modify the test name.
All right.
Let's change it to say, when configured, null fetcher returns default for unconfigured values. And we're going to configure that, and we're going to assert that this average for full house is equal to.
That's going to be the 42.
42.
Okay. All right. I feel out fail says internationalization. No, this is at the testing level. So this is internal stuff that would only appear in tests. So it's whatever the language of the programmer and the language of the code base. That's what language I would use.
Yeah, and even if you were using the nullables in production, which does happen, the exception messages wouldn't be revealed to the customer.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably similar to how you would log, because customers wouldn't see log messages, but they would need to be in whatever natural human language of the developer, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So this should fail because it'll throw an exception.
Yeah.
Yep. So
what we need to do is basically combine the two create nulls into one.
Okay. Ooh.
So the way I would do it is I would implement it using the
actually
default create null, and then just check to see if we have that in our map and post it in.
Well, I was going to basically do something similar to this for all values, and then call this with that map and let it do the translation.
I didn't understand that. Does
I
Java have
see
the
what you're
ability?
saying.
Does Java have the ability to merge maps? Can we just say, can I say, given this map, paste this map over the top of it?
I think so.
Yeah, let's just do that. Let's do the defaults that we have on line 28.
Yeah.
And then paste over the map that we get in line 37.
So I'm just curious. So map.merge. That's not what we want. But the put will overwrite it. Yeah, okay. So then this is so this is default value map. And then instead of new hash map, oops, not there. Instead of new hash map here, it's create default value map. And then this will, for each pull through here, the put will override, will replace the element that was there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And look at that. I just have to say this, and it's always so satisfying when I just write code and I don't have to think about it a lot. Like I don't have to, and I always tell this to people when I'm introducing TDD. It's like I just don't think of like there's this extra step that I used to do, which is okay, now is the code right? I've written it, and now I sort of mentally execute it. But when you have tests that are just fast and so on, it's like that's so much less energy to just hit Control R and C.
Does it work? Yes, it worked.
The tests say so, no, so it must. I guess that's it.
Yeah. It's funny because I've been doing this for years and years and years, and I'll sit with people who haven't done this before, and they'll write some code, and then they will sit and stare at it. And of course, you're pairing with them, and this is not fun to watch them sit there and stare. I was like, just run the tests. It'll tell you. And they're like, oh yeah, because that mindset of I don't have to decide whether this works or not is just not there yet.
Yeah.
But you can go so fast when you've got good tests. It's really not about does this work? It's how do I write this? And then did it work?
Yeah.
I love that too.
Yeah.
And it really frees up your brain for a lot more.
Yeah. And that's what sort of just hit me. It's like, I get, like it's still fuzzy in my head and I wrote the code, it compiled. So, okay, I let's see if it works, and it worked. So therefore I didn't have to spend any of that energy doing the analysis, which you basically then in a sense throw away. Because all that analysis and effort was just to verify that it worked in your head, which may be wrong. And you get totally just discard that whole process. And yeah, it's such a saving of valuable brain energy.
I agree. You should be able to run all the tests now and see them pass.
Let's see. Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's delete all that stub code as Whiskey says.
Let's go delete that. And then this we can just go and delete that. And delete that. And this we can now make final. Clear out that. And see if everything compiles. Does. And all tests pass.
Excellent.
Amazing.
Okay. There's a little bit more improvements I'd like to make here.
There's still some duplication.
Yeah. So what I would like to do, so the way I'll typically do this is that the decomposition that you have to do to make to basically take the configurable responses down a level, that adds some noise. So I'll typically make it a private method at the bottom called something like nulled HTTP responses or something like that. And what I would do here is rather than calling it create default value map, I would actually rename that. Can I drive and show you what I'm thinking? Now you get to see me fumble with my keystrokes. I'll just ask you.
Shift F6.
Shift F6 to rename?
Yep.
Okay. It's also Command Option R, which is what I always use. So what did I say that we were going to call that? Nulled HTTP responses?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to take this, I'm going to put that in there. Where did that go? Oh, it's here. This is probably not as clean as it could be.
You have a spelling error in endpoints responses. That's why it's showing up as red.
That probably wants me to have the string in the object, doesn't it?
So can I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So what you want, so what you can do is this.
So what I want to do is just pass in.
Yeah, so we can basically introduce as a parameter. It's called map. And it turns out that actually that's not needed because it knows.
And then we can delete line 24.
Well, then we can Yeah, delete time 24. And this could just be map. Because this is all. This can just be inline, right? Is this what you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite done because I think it's a little clunky, but basically what I wanted to do was to, in the default create null, pass in an empty hash map, and in the non-default null, pass in the map that we're given.
It doesn't know what this is, so let's...
Whiskey says the key type should be score category, shouldn't it? And...
Oh, it did something funky here. Well, so because we lost some type information, right? So here we have the type information of score category in double, because that's what...
That's what the type should be on line 28.
Yeah, okay.
I copied the wrong thing.
Okay. That's why I was complaining.
And then the same thing on line 24.
And then this.
Oh,
no. So,
no, it's, I got it. We are mapping from, so we probably should just, so I YOLO'd it and I screwed it up and we should undo.
Yeah.
Let's just undo all the way back to where it was working again.
So let's do that. Oh. That went back too far. So let's go. Oh, come on, you're serious? Oh, because code together is sending keystrokes. That's why.
Oh, of course.
Oh, good Lord. That's why it's like, that's why it's like 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 by 1.
Okay, so that should work again, right?
Okay, yeah, let's make sure. Yeah, okay, so that works.
Okay, so let me show you what I'm thinking without actually trying to program it.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is that in create null, so I'm going to rename this. That is correct. We were going to say this to be the nulled HTTP responses. And in nulled HTTP responses, what I want to pass in is a new score category map that is empty.
Okay.
And have this code that's currently happening in nulled HTTP responses happen.
So you're saying
have this code that's currently happening here on line 40 happen inside of nulled HTTP responses.
Okay, so basically do the merge at the score category double level instead of merging it at the HTTP responses level.
Yeah, I just want to take. I want to end up with all the logic in nulled HTTP responses, and the only difference between the two create nulls is what we pass in.
All right, so let me see if I can get that.
I think I was missing a end close parenthesis.
So,
Luigi's got it. Yeah.
We want is, yeah. So here we want an empty map. Well, no, we have to be careful because, oh no, it's copying it from this, so this is fine. Okay.
You know what? You know how we could sneak up on this? Actually, I think I got it. One moment. All we need to do is say return create null.
Yeah.
Or whatever the appropriate syntactic equivalent is.
I don't think it's on map. I think it is empty. I think it's on collections. Yeah. Right, because then Is that going to work? So that would call. So that would not basically do a null iteration, and then it would do a create null. We get the null, and then right, and so then that, and then this would basically be a no op because the map would be empty. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See. Yep.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yep.
And then what I want to do is take line 30, and now that we only have one place that's, or not line 30, I keep getting thrown off by the create nulls not being next to each other. I want to take line 40 and put that inside of null HTTP responses.
You want this. Okay. So basically you want the null HTTP responses to return this. So
yeah. Now we already have a method called null HTTP responses.
I know.
Okay.
So let me inline this.
Now I see what you're getting at.
And then we. Yeah, so that's actually a common maneuver that I do is basically what do you want the thing to look like? Capture that, and then inline the thing that was the smaller thing that you no longer want. And so if you extract method and then do inline, then you've got two automated refactorings to get the same result.
Got it.
And then everything works.
Yeah, just fix the names then, and
yeah, that's the only problem is IntelliJ likes to add one, and I have filed a bug on that because that is so freaking annoying. And it's so unnecessary. Like,
right.
5% of the time is that, okay, you need to differentiate, but like here, there was just absolutely no reason for it. Yeah, right. And that worked.
Okay. And then I would probably put that at the bottom of the file.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
That's a stylistic call.
No, I'm up for that. And I think someone, it might have been Sweegie, said, should this be package private, or should this now be private?
It should be package private.
Yeah.
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 And then Brave Cobra suggests that each of those be a 4 each.
Yeah, so this one we could do a collect. I don't know if that's easier. Yeah, I don't know that this one is not going to be much better. Yeah, you could do the enum set. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. Because it is an yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, but we'll leave it. It's good enough.
You know what? The double loop is bothering me. What I would do, let me pseudocode for a moment. What I would do would be just something like this. If map.has score category value equals map.value or map.get score category, and let value equals 42. And then here, you just put in value.
Right.
And then this goes away.
Right.
See where I'm going with that?
Yep. Yep. Oh, you could leave that in there.
Is it close enough?
That's close enough.
All right.
Yeah, so would you pull this 42 into a constant?
No.
Okay. So is that
Whiskey says get or default. So that sounds cool. I like that.
Oh, see, it's so funny. I don't do a lot with maps. So,
yeah, so it's just double value equals map.get or default.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
So,
and that's better than, and now I don't feel guilty about not having the constant because it's really clear that 42 is the default.
So this is the key. So let's pull
that
this.
I might put in a variable.
So let's pull this into a variable. We'll actually call this URL. And let's move that here. And so then this is URL like that.
We don't need that line anymore,
right,
because it's covered by the getter default.
Right. And the key is URL. And what's it complaining about? Oh, that's not the URL. That's the URL, but that's not the score category. Because we're pulling it from.
Yeah, line 46.
Okay, so this word map
category.
is confusing me. That's why. So let me rename it. This is the
fetcher responses. Or, yeah. And maybe for endpoints responses, we should call that the HTTP responses.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. Excellent. And is that formatted the way you want it?
No, so
that looks a little funky to me.
There we go. And now we can actually pretty much put this.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what this decomposition typically looks like, is a lot like that.
Yep.
So that feels a lot better to me. Whiskey, I don't understand the question. Do you get that, Ted?
Sorry, I just saw the comment, the constant. Which level of abstraction does a response become an answer? Not sure I understand. So the JSON we get back from the server is basically a string and a number, but the port here is defined as returning just basically it pulls out the get average, and that's the responsibility of this class.
Oh, I think I see what Whiskey's getting at.
This is really not quite. Yeah. So if that's what the question is, does this match this? No. Well,
I think so. So the pattern name is configurable responses, Whiskey, and I think that's why we've been calling them responses everywhere. Yeah, the double average.
Yes, because it
is a response.
Yeah, because it is a response from the server of what is the average, what is the category average for this category.
So I think we're done with this. You're running all the tests, and they're all passing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are we missing any tests?
Let's see. So this test now passes, and we get the default here. And we get the default here. And we get one of the values here. I mean, it seems complete to me.
Okay, let's take a break.
Alrighty. We'll be back after this break. All right, and we're back.
Okay, so we finished AverageScoreFetcher, right?
Yeah, so Brave Cobra asked, we didn't check whether the given one was the only one that was overridden. I think that's covered because here, I mean, I guess you could say, well, we overrode many and only checked for one. I don't see the need to override only one and only check for that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fine.
I think that's fine. And we do check that if we configure it for one, we get defaults for all the others.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily feel the need to check for all the others, for several others, because we actually have a test that checks for several others. So I feel like that's good enough.
Yeah, I think it's good enough. Yeah, so that's done. So we've got about 40 minutes left-ish. I think, let's check it in.
Oops.
But I think we're basically done with the adapters portion of the work. And now we can move on to some of the higher level stuff.
All right. Let's do it.
Before we move on, probably a good point to ask you. So now that this is, when we originally did the embedded stub, it was a little bit clunky. But this is the way it's supposed to work. You're supposed to have the low-level adapter that you just use.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you've seen how that works and have had that experience, what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, those embedded stubs were really annoying.
Or nasty.
So not having the embedded stubs and JsonHttpClient is what it is, but I think like you've said several times, like you do it once and it's done. And so now we're using the higher level thing. It took me a little while to sort of separate in my head, like what are we asserting? But I think that's becoming more clear.
I call it overlapping sociable tests, and I'd say that for every test you're looking at, what is the thing that is under test, and what are the dependencies of that thing that I'm configuring? And you do that over and over, and the way you do it is this test this thing and its dependencies, and then you test the dependencies and its dependencies, and then you test its dependencies using its, and all the code ends up running all the way through, but each of your tests is sort of like doing these two pieces that end up overlapping. And sometimes when you have events coming in, you'll write a test that says, well, I'm triggering an event at the thing that depends on me, and then I'm testing that my thing responds to that event properly, and I'm configuring the dependencies it has. So we actually end up with sort of three things going blunk, 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 all the way down, and you end up with this overlapping, sort of this fine overlapping mesh that makes sure that you have absolute 100% coverage, even though you're not writing any broad tests anywhere in this.
And I actually call that I do the exactly same thing, and I call those chain tests, and like, because they're all, each link is really strong and they're all connected together. And so, I always bristle at when people say it's like, show these memes where it's like, unit tests and like, these things don't work together. It's like, well, then you didn't really, you tested each thing in isolation and you never tested these two things together. And it's like, so of course it doesn't work when you have five things together, because you never tested any of the two. And so but
if you check that each chain, each link in the chain, actually do that. I say a mesh, like a chain link fence, right? But if each one hooks to the next one, then it's sort of transitive. If this hooks to this and this hooks to that, then this one,
it almost worked, If not, then you made some assumption wrong, but everything did what it was supposed to do. Whether it was supposed to do that is well, that's where the fun is.
Go ahead.
So I was going to read Brave Cobra's question around published package library. I don't know. I have no idea. So maybe you have some sense of that.
Well, I think AverageScoreFetcher and Notifier, those are very much in your application domain. I don't think those would be published. But HTTP client, I think, is something that you'd want to publish. Maybe not literally this one, because I think there's some assumptions being made that aren't generally applicable yet.
Right.
But I am planning on publishing the one I've made for JavaScript, because it's been through several iterations on several projects now, and I feel like I've really got it down. And I've mentioned this before. It handles errors, it handles timeouts, it handles, all the different cases that you'd care about. And what that looks like is kind of like what we have with JSON HTTP client, and that there's a get and there's a create null, and the create null just says, here are all the different responses that for each URL that we care about. So, so Brave Cobra says, I was talking more in general on the technique. I don't think you could make the technique a package. I have an article.
It's definitely a pattern, but certainly the implementations, like you said, like, okay, this JSON HTTP client is making some assumptions. it would, like anything that you would turn into a library, you'd want to have enough usages where you felt like you covered all of the cases. And so if I were to take this and put it in my Ensemble production app, I'm sure I'd make some changes, but then it would be much more reusable. And then I put in another app, and probably at that point, it would be something that certainly, I don't know if it would be worth publishing to Maven as a dependency, but it'd be certainly something that you could just copy and paste. I mean, I don't, this idea of, I mean, that's definitely a Java. The thing I like about the Java world is you tend not to have tiny dependencies on individual little tiny things where it's just like you could have copied and pasted it. Whereas in the JavaScript world, NPM, it's like the whole left pad thing.
It's the Unix philosophy. It's lots of little things, and I think there's pluses and minuses to both. Thinking about JSON HTTP client, the thing that feels most clunky to me about it, if we were to generalize it, is one, the fact that it doesn't have a default implementation that it throws exceptions, and second, that it's returning entities. I know that's just Spring Boot, but we've run into that a couple of times now. That this doesn't feel like the right level of abstraction. If we're testing that, for example, JSON AverageScoreFetcher is making a call to the service, really what we're thinking about is, well, what you have, if you pull up that document that you have that says you do a post and a get,
right?
That's what I want the test to look like. Yeah. Where is that document?
I don't know. So I've got. I'll have to find it. But yeah, so that's, I mean, that's a whoops.
I'm thinking of the one where you showed it just has is.
I don't have it handy, so I'm not gonna.
Oh, okay. Is it in a different?
Yeah.
It's in a different file or a different project.
So I mean, so that's where I would probably play with the level of abstraction this is at, which is at the REST template. I would alternatively try out what I was mentioning earlier in the stream, which is plugging in a true HTTP client, a nullable HTTP client at a lower level, and basically have all REST templates build based on that. So it's still doing the work, but we're doing the configuration of the responses at the HTTP response level as opposed to the entities. Yeah.
Okay. So now we've got about half an hour left. And I wonder, so we are kind of a stopping point in terms of architecturally. I think the next thing to do would be to start looking at controllers and the game service. And generally what I would do is I start at the bottom. Unless I've got a really big system, if I'm introducing nullables, I'll start at the lowest level adapter, and I'll make it nullable, and then I'll sort of pop on up. You notice how it was a little bit awkward when we changed the fetcher from using a stub to using the nullable. It would have been simpler to program that if we'd started with a JSON HTTP client.
Right.
So I'll start at the lowest level, I'll make the low level adapter, and then I'll use that to implement the higher level adapters or modify them if I'm working with existing code. And I'll continue going up through the system until we get to the entry point, which in your case is the controllers. So the next level up from here, I think, is the game service.
Right.
And so that would be the next thing I would make nullable. And actually, it's probably not that hard, because by default, I think a game service.create would just be make a notifier.create, a fetcher.create, and a die roller.create. And a null version of that would be make a null version of each of those things.
Right.
And then that's it.
Right.
So should we do that?
Yeah.
What kind of test do we want to write around it, if any? So you've got a bunch of different test files.
Right.
You don't really have anything that's talking about instantiation, do you?
No, they're all pretty much testing. So here I've got comments because I was teaching something. There's not a lot. These were just
Yeah, we did modify this to
so
use
the reason,
tracker.
the reason why is this is not a full service from hexagonal. This is sort of violating it because it's holding on to domain state, and so there's not really, the game service is pretty much a middleman that's wasn't originally doing much until we started with the dice roller, and so pulled some of that into it. So that stuff is tested more directly. But there isn't something about, hey, let me create a game service and do something about it.
Yeah, because it's effectively a proxy. Originally, it was just a proxy. It was basically a facade over your domain model.
Yeah, it was almost pure. It was originally pure delegation, and it was just to introduce the layer for educational purposes.
Right.
If and when we get to persistence, then it will become much more important.
Mm-hmm. But all your controllers are using the game service, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And they're getting it injected because this constructor is mainly called. So we're basically doing in production. This is what we're doing.
Show me how your controller tests work.
Oops, controller tests. So let's do this one or this one. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a method, create game service with die roles of. So that is effectively what our game service.create null should be.
Hmm.
And in fact,
right, because it basically does a create null on the die roller, passes in a no op for the notifier, does a create null on the, like we're almost there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's because we did sort of gradually refactor it.
Yeah.
So yeah, do you have anything else that uses the game service in any other way?
I mean, there might be. So the view controller test is same kind of thing. So all these tests are using it in a somewhat similar way, that they're always. So like this one is. Yeah, again, sort of create and create null. That it doesn't care about anything other than a certain aspect of it, and those could probably be cleaned up as well.
So let me sketch out what I think the game service create null test should look like. I'm trying to find it in my copy of the code here. Game service. Can you pull up one of those tests?
You mean like this test?
No, one of the game service tests.
Oh, sorry. So like this test. Oops, something happened. I must have hit a key. Okay.
Right. So game service notification test, for example, this isn't the right place to write this test, but what I'm imagining is something like this. I know you don't like this terminology, but you can fix it. Can configure game service with die roles and can configure game service with average scores. Those are the things that we're going to care about in our tests, in our controller tests, right? That we're never going to care about the notification stuff. We can just track it. But for the controllers, we're going to need to be able to control what die rolls we get in, and we're going to need to be able to control what average scores come back. So in JavaScript, the way I would implement this is something along the lines of game service.create null die roles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and average scores.
Mm-hmm.
4s, 13,
Right.
5s, 25, full house, 6, whatever. Because game service is sort of an aggregate, so we want to be able to configure basically entirely different things. And so the way I do that is with an object with different keys.
Right.
I think in Java, what we're going to want to do is basically make a configuration object, probably using Fluent Builder pattern.
Yeah. So one thing I'm thinking, and so this is where the service, because it was sort of created whole cloth without much thought, doesn't, like, there's a possibly a way to subdivide it. I'm not sure though how much that would get us. What I was thinking is, if we subdivide game service into more dedicated, more command-like things, then you might not need to, like, if it's the sort of the stuff around roll dice, you don't care about the notifier and the fetcher, right? So you'd have the game dice roller service, and then maybe at that point you might just directly call the die roller. It's hard to say, but that you can sort of subdivide the game service so that that's not basically, that from an architectural standpoint, that you're not dependent on 3 different things that this part only uses one of them, this part only uses one of them, and this part uses 2 others. Then why not just create separate classes? But I don't know that I want to go through that right now.
So from the beginning, game services bugged me. When you first described it to me, and the fact that it was just sort of forwarding on, that was my emergency light was going off saying, it's not doing anything.
Right.
What value does it bring?
Right.
And I think it's partly because you don't have a database, because you do need an adapter for a persistence layer for the game state.
Exactly.
And that's what I was imagining.
Right.
That's what I would imagine game service should be.
Yes.
And it sounds like you kind of did have that intention as well.
Yeah, it was basically, in fact, I have the persistence halfway implemented for when we're ready for that.
Right.
So that, because any command methods that you'd call on the game service, well, any methods at all, it would have to retrieve that state from the database so that you know what game you're working on. And then any command methods that you're invoking on the domain would also then have to save it back to the database. And that would involve then bringing in things like identifiers. Well, which game are we talking about? And so I didn't want to bring that into the code base just yet, but that is a lot of what the service does is that coordination of primarily with the persistence, but also then with the external services.
Yeah. And you've implemented it as sort of a proxy where you're going to intercept everything that we want to do with the game so that we can persist it. I would do that differently. But I don't want to get into how that could be done differently right now, because it's a whole nother conversation. But if we set aside the persistence, and if we just think about the domain model, what I would really want to do is not have the game service at all, and just have the controller operate on the domain. So I'd want the controller to say, get the game from the game service, and then operate on the domain objects. And then I think if you do that, then you do get that splitting of concerns that you were talking about. Yeah,
and some people talk about vertical slice architecture, which I feel is, yet another thing. It's one of those, it depends on and this is where I sort of see this flexible architecture of, like, if you only have one client, one entry point, one UI, then that makes sense. Then you really don't need the intermediary. What hexagonal says is, if you have multiple clients, like I've got server-side generated HTML, but I also have an iPhone API, plus I have one that I can pull in from a message-based system, then you don't want 3 different implementations for each one of those. You want to take the stuff that's common across those, and that's what goes into the service layer. And then all the stuff that's specific to those incoming adapters would handle just those, and they're then become just translators of the outside world to the domain. Yeah.
And this is where we get back to some of the A-frame architecture stuff that I think could be really interesting when we get there. Regardless of how it's implemented, though, in my mind, before we can do those sorts of big sweeping refactorings, we need to have the sociable tests in place.
Right.
So if I'm modifying an existing code base, which is what we're doing here, I will take the nullables all the way up to the controllers and just keep the exact same design that we have. Because once those nullables are in place, then refactoring, because it's all now covered by sociable tests, we can refactor without fear of breaking anything.
Right.
Now, it may not be necessary in your code base because you did mostly have sociable tests already. And when we were, and I think just going through and replacing those few no ops that you have remaining with the nullables, that would make them sociable. But you noticed how when we originally started doing the refactoring, that it required us to go through and like do a lot of changes every time we introduced the new nullable. We had to go through and introduce a lot of changes. Whereas if we made the game service nullable and then used the nulled game service in your controllers, I think that will no longer happen. And we can start doing these bigger refactorings without having to make a lot of changes every time we refactor. So I'm still inclined to say that our next step is to just sort of play it where it lies with game service, make it nullable, using, and taking this as a sign that on the left, taking that sort of two-pronged configuration as a sign that maybe something's wrong. But on the other hand, that's actually pretty typical for me at the application layer to have that kind of this object is responsible for bringing this thing together and this thing together and this thing together. And so it does have multiple pieces of configuration, and that's okay.
Yeah, and it's one of those where if it's only doing a few things, that's totally fine. If it's doing a whole bunch and there's each command is talking to if you have like 8 different dependencies and the class is a lot larger, then I look to split. But otherwise, if it's not hard to set up, then that's the big deal.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole point of game service is to provide a centralized interface to the domain.
Yeah.
So it is bringing everything together.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's a good idea, there's not a black and white answer on that. I think there's other ways to do it, but that doesn't mean they're better.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some comments in chat around layers and so on, and there's this tension, and I think we sort of touched on it before, is like layers, if they're done right, can provide that structure. If they're done wrong because you're just copying and pasting sort of mentally architectures without thinking about why you're doing that, then that's, I think, where it goes wrong. And I see that.
You end up spending a huge amount of time just translating data from format to format to format to format. And you look for the meat, and you've got this 7-layer burrito architecture, and there's no rice, beans, or chicken.
Yeah.
Where's the pollo? Right. It's just tortilla.
Yeah. And it's like, that doesn't taste very good. Yeah. That's not very filling. Yeah.
I think we butchered that metaphor.
So, should we do this?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, but I think what we could at least do is implement a configurable configuration. I'd call it I'd use a Fluent builder pattern, and I'd probably call it something like game service responses or nulled game service configuration or something like that.
So let's say we want, let's write this a little more matching what we've got. So we'd have dice. So it's not a hand.
Let me try to write this in a. So this is the JavaScript way,
right?
And I think the Java way would be something like this. Game service responses. Let me try to follow your syntax with die roles. With average scores. I think that is effectively equivalent. That's sort of what I'm imagining with the Fluent Builder pattern.
Yep.
And then, of course, each of those would have defaults.
Right. And so then we'll need a build.
We don't even have to do a .build at the end.
If we're assuming that that you must specify everything, that this is the terminal one.
No, we don't even have to do that. We could just we could implement it something like this. Maybe I'm mistaken something here. But if we have a private die roles, then with die roles could take return a new game service. Let's see, result equals new game service responses.
Oh yeah, you could do it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Result dot die roles equals roles return result.
Right, you could do it that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've never loved that terminal build. I know it's sort of part of the classic builder pattern, but when I think of Fluent Builder, I think of one that is actually returning itself at each step of the way.
Yeah, the problem is it doesn't know when to fill in the defaults unless you specify those all up front. And sometimes that can be expensive.
Oh, you mean specify them like this?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not that expensive.
Well, it depends on the builder. There's some that can be expensive.
Yeah, but I don't
not
think
expensive from a runtime, but expensive from a. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't even need to make it immutable. We can just have it mutate in place.
Yeah. All right, so let's do that. So
feel free to comment out or delete.
Yeah. So this is going to be.
I probably wouldn't test drive this, or rather, I just do it in the test like we're doing, because I don't know that.
Yeah, that's sort of where I was going. Is what I tend to do is I don't build the builder up front. I tend to sort of write what I want and then extract it, and then extract, and then start building the builder once I've extracted a few things. But either way,
yeah, I think I tend to be a little bit different. I have noticed that I'm more inclined, as we're doing these, I'm sort of more inclined to stop and say, wait, what's our interface? And figure that out, right? And then once I've got that in my head, I'll program to that interface. Where it seems like you are more inclined to use the test to sort of elaborate what the interface is as you're working.
Yeah, I'm lazy.
And I have a lot of respect for that.
I'm lazy. I don't like to think up front.
Yeah, I'm lazy. I don't like to refactor code if I don't have to. But I'm also not as proficient with the refactorings in IntelliJ as you are, so that could be part of it.
So let's see. So
yeah, that should work just fine.
Create this method. Responses. And that is. We can fix up the names a little bit. So this is scores.
Yeah, I agree with you, Whiskey. I like immutable code as well. But I don't like all the hoops I have to jump through sometimes to make things immutable. Like if we were to make this immutable, then we'd have to make a new instance of game service responses and copy all the values over.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'd get the benefit from that.
Yeah.
That would make it worth it. Okay. Well, now that we've got this figured out, I'm kind of actually going back to your point of view, Ted, which is that we need to start test driving this, and we've implemented too much. But
I don't know that we've implemented all that much.
no. The main thing is the defaults are a bit tricky.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't figured out what the defaults are, which is why I'd sort of do just more for safety. And I might even use null, but
I think we should use null because actually that
clearly break.
Because we need the default. I'll typically let the defaults flow through. So I won't specify a new default. I'll just, whatever our default dice roller response is, that's what I want the defaults to be, which I think for us is ones. But we do want that infinite stream of ones. Right. So I'm just looking at the time and I'm thinking that maybe this is a good spot to stop before we start implementing it.
Yeah, I think this is a good stopping point. Yeah.
Okay. So let's at least let's do this since we do have a couple minutes. Let's I think you can get rid of that. Yeah.
And so are we going to pass in game service responses into the create null? Is that what the plan is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then sorry. Cursor.
And I think actually those commented out lines are correct. You're just going to keep those.
Yeah, they're just not going to compile yet. We can make it compile.
Yeah, let's make it compile. Let's fix the name too.
Oops, I lost a brace.
Got an extra brace because there's more tests down below.
Oh, no, I took out the semicolon. That's fine. That doesn't belong there. Okay.
What's going on? Where's the rest of our tests?
Oh. Nope. Didn't want to close that. Okay.
Yeah. And eventually that's going to need to go inside of game service.
Yeah.
And so maybe it'll be an inner class called game service dot responses, or nulled responses, perhaps.
And so we said we want to create this method. And it's going to return a game service. And yeah, right here is where we're going to need the... All right. I guess we are doing this. Come on.
It doesn't love the location of our game service responses. Do you like responses or nulled responses better?
Let's see. How does it read? Well, we're calling it in the context of create null. So I think responses is fine.
Yeah, I was actually going the other way because I think when somebody's just looking at the code, they're going to see this class responses and they're not going to know the context of it. So calling it nulled responses makes that more clear.
Try it out and see what it looks like.
Yeah, it's easy to refactor.
Yep. And so then this is...
Should be just game service dot nulled responses.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yep. Okay.
Whiskey, you have not mentioned Kotlin, and I was disappointed because in previous streams you've always mentioned Kotlin. So thank you for getting that in.
There's a requirement that you have to mention at least once per stream.
I've not used Kotlin yet, but I'm interested in using it.
It's nice. It's that I've done some stuff with it, and it does fix some of the problems with Java, and the no nulls allowed kind of thing is really quite nice. I wish more of my clients would beg for that kind of thing, so that would have reason to do it.
Yeah, that's sort of the downside of being a consultant, right? Is you're sort of at the whims, the mercy of the folks that hire you, and they tend not to be on the cutting edge.
And Kotlin has a very, for the most part, its marketing is aimed at Android, and so I just don't, honestly, not interested in Android.
Yeah.
Should we leave it here? Do you want to put any other breadcrumbs? It basically doesn't compile.
Let's see. I think line 24 in the tests. Let's do this. Let me type for just a second. Let's do it this way.
Okay.
And then probably need to move to more appropriate test class.
All right. All right.
Phil, I agree. I think that's why I wanted null responses, because otherwise it feels to me like it's just generic, all kinds of responses.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm good with it. And as I like to say, it's like, try it out in the code and see what it looks like on the screen and not in your head, because it looks different in your head.
It does. There have been so many times where I've said, when I thought this is going to work, and then I put it out and it doesn't work at all.
Yeah. Or vice versa. Or vice versa, where it's like, I don't see how that could possibly work, and then you do it. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, that's one of my favorite tricks. Is I will say, well, that's a really dumb idea. Let's try it.
Right.
And then I do it, and I was like, that's actually not so bad. Dumb. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
So and you get more of that when you're pairing, of course.
Yeah.
If you're good at pairing, you'll be like, well, sorry, Ted, but that's really stupid, and you're an idiot. But let's try it. And then it's like, oh, I guess I'm the idiot here, because that's really good. So I won't say that out loud, but there are a lot of times when I'm pairing, when somebody suggests something, and I just have to grit my teeth and say, sure, let's see it. And then it turns out great.
Yeah. All right. Anything else any other chat stuff we want to follow up on?
Yeah.
So
for reference for next time, we are going to implement create null on game service.
Right.
And I don't think that's going to take us too long. Of course, that's what I always say.
But it'll take what it takes.
It'll take what it takes.
Yeah. It won't be a lot of lines of code. Yeah.
And then once we have that implemented, then we will start using that in our controllers, and then we can look at, well, how does that change our controllers?
Right.
And one thing that I think could be really interesting, well, at that point we can start getting into A-frame architecture and start looking at refactoring and this question of, game service or not game service. Or we could start putting in error handling in the controllers using the nullables, which would force us to sort of put configurable layers all the way through.
Right.
Or as Whiskey and many people have told me, we could start doing database stuff.
Yeah. That I'd probably say is before we do the error stuff, I think the database stuff is going to be.
People are pretty interested in that.
Yeah.
So let's plan on that. And I think when we start doing the databases, that will actually start taking us into a lot of discussions of architecture.
Yeah.
Because the question of how does game service relate to the database, and how does the domain model relate to the database?
Right.
There's some interesting stuff there.
Yes. Lots of opinions out there.
Yeah. So let's let's write this down somewhere so we remember it. I'll watch the video, but should we check this in, what we've got so far?
Yeah. So let's do that. Do that.
So I think what's next is to have the controllers use the nullable game service. Then evaluate changes to controller, then consider changes to controllers, then introduce game service or persistence for the games. With a database.
Well, some kind of persistence.
Some kind of persistence. Preferably a database. I think people are more interested in a database than a service.
It'll be a database. Yep.
Yeah. And probably won't get that the next time, but we might. Are you ready to go for us on a database?
Yeah. That's pretty straightforward.
All right. So reminder to everybody, we are moving the schedule to Mondays from 1 to 4 Pacific. That's 1 hour earlier and 1 day earlier than this stream. Mm-hmm. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on Monday next time.
Have a good one. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Appreciate it, as always.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I did upgrade to Java 17. That was a little bit of fun at the beginning. So it's all in Java 17. So that's why we're able to convert stuff to records.
Yay, records.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Whiskey Sierra and Fail and all your other folks. See you next time.